It's not unusual for someone to get to the end of the day and look back on the day, think about the things that they did or didn't do, how they interacted with different people around them, and feel discouraged in themselves. And at first glance, Psalm 15 doesn't seem to help with that. If you were to read Psalm 15 right before you go to bed, you might wish you hadn't, at least initially. Psalm 15 starts out by asking a question: Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary, who may live on your holy hill? In other words, who has the right to approach God, and to approach God with confidence that God isn't going to be angry at me for anything. He's just going to treat me with love. And then he goes on to answer the question, well, he whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from the heart, who has no slander on his tongue, who does his neighbor no wrong, who keeps his oath even when it hurts, who's honest. All these different things. It seems like a to-do list comes across as a to-do list. Well, as long as I do these things well enough, as long as I check all the boxes by all of them, then God is going to love me. But that's not the case at all. This is when it's important to remember that the reason God sent Jesus, the reason he gave us the gospel, the good news, was not to increase the pressure on our hearts, which is what happens when we evaluate our value based on how well we do or don't do these things. God gave us the gospel, God sent Jesus to relieve the pressure on our hearts so that we could evaluate our value not according to how well we do anything, but according to how well Jesus did. How well Jesus lived a life of perfection, how well Jesus and successfully Jesus got to the cross, how sufficiently Jesus forgave everyone's sins and served as our sacrifice. We could evaluate our value based on his merits, his death, his resurrection, everything that he accomplished. And because he did all of those things, well, that's where we rest our souls at the end of every day. We remember what Jesus did and remember what that means for us. It means that we are children of God. We do belong with God. We can approach God's throne of grace with confidence. I mean, Jesus and the Apostle Paul and so many others in Scripture, they emphasize again and again, we're saved by grace. We're saved by grace through faith and not by works, not by an evaluation of how well we performed that day. We simply are children of God because that's what Jesus has made us. Jesus did that. So then what's the purpose of Psalm 15? Well, Jesus and the Apostle Paul and so many others in the Bible, they also talk about the consistency of our faith. That when we believe we are children of God, then that belief will show up in our lives of faith. And that's what these things are. These are acts of faith. These are good things that show up in our lives out of love for God. We show love for God, we show love for others because God first loved us. But this is what this is. It's faith. It's living by faith. It's showing up in faith. And if you were to do a deep dive evaluation into these things that Psalm 15 mentions, these particular things, and think about times in your life where you have put them into practice, I think you'll realize two things about them. One, that they're all a lot harder than we want them to be. There's often a wrestling match that goes on in the heart before we end up doing the good thing, a wrestling match between how we feel, often feeling like not doing the good thing, but knowing that we want to do the good thing, that's the better thing. And if we end up doing it, then we end up doing it, but there's a lot of effort and a lot of energy that nobody ever sees. That goes into a lot of that. And then the second thing, even if we're doing the good things, it's impossible to predict how others are going to treat us in response. It's impossible to know if it's going to accomplish and carry out the things that we want it to carry out. And so for those two reasons, because nobody on earth will ever fully appreciate the effort that goes into doing these things, and because it's impossible to predict even if it's going to go well when we do the good things, we can often feel discouraged for that reason, wondering if it's worth it. Well, in Psalm 15, God is telling you it's worth it. That's why he says what he does in the last verse, he who does these things will never be shaken. God is saying that he sees you. He sees what you do. He sees the effort. He sees the wrestling. He sees the struggle. He sees the faith. He sees it all within the context of what Jesus has done for you. And so he delights in you, all of it. All of it. And he's telling you it's going to be worth it. I mean, Jesus better than anyone knows how hard it is to keep his oath even when it hurts. Boy, I thought of Jesus right away when I read that. But he did, and we know the good that it did for us. A very special kind of good. And the good that you do for others in your life of faith, it's not quite the same special, but God's telling you it's significant. Keep it up. Keep it up. It's doing good. More good than you will ever know. We rest in grace so that we can keep going, living lives of faith. Rest well tonight, my friends.